everyone, so now that my latest dinosaur project is all done, it's time for some more monster fun, so let's make a Godzilla -1. During this YouTube video today, we'll be making a stop-motion skeleton, you could say, of Godzilla -1, I do say. From the tip of the tail to the snout, and even all those back plates that are placed all about. But as I sculpt away at this skeleton today, we'll be talking about Godzilla -1, I do say. So, I'm sure you have all heard the good news at this point, my Kaiju and Godzilla fans, that the recent trailer has been released for Godzilla -1. And honestly, it looks truly mind-blowing. Pun intended. The visuals, the tone, the thing just looks perfect, and I'm very pumped for this movie. And honestly, it looks truly amazing, a lot better than I expected. And it's kinda nice to see that Godzilla will be returning to, well, his basically former state. Do you think you'll be able to survive and fight? Well, let's find out and do a deep dive on this trailer. Because one big detail was revealed, so stay tuned to the very end to find out. Because it could make a kaiju-sized difference to your viewing experience. So let's not waste any more time, let's break down this trailer. -1 Godzilla is directed by Takashi Yamazaki and is set in 1947, just after the end of World War II. And we have a new synopsis. In post-war Japan, a new terror has risen, Godzilla. Will the traumatized and devastated people of Japan be able to survive? Let alone fight back. So tensions will obviously be high between the Americans and the Japanese civilians, following the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Speaking of Japanese civilians, the trailer starts out with them running away from something, screaming for their lives. Continuing on from the teaser we saw a few months back. The production design here looks incredible, or perfect in my opinion. It really makes you feel like you're walking through Tokyo in the 40s, or at least what's left of it. One of the characters in the trailer asks, "What is it?" And another one replies with, "I don't know, it's something big." Then we get a peek at our first confirmed cast member, Yunosuke Kamiki, who seems to be on his knees on ground zero, helplessly looking up at something. We then cut to a scene with two train drivers, helplessly screaming at something blocking the tracks, which happens to be Godzilla. He then proceeds to throw a bus onto the railway tracks, which will inevitably lead to the train being derailed. We then cut to a scene with smoke filling the air just before Godzilla's snout peers out. If this is following an attack from the US Naval Forces, then I'm sure the crew is terrified that such a creature can survive a bombardment completely unscathed. And one other really cool shot, and yeah, you're probably gonna hear me say that a lot during this video. We see another character played by Mainame Hayabe. She looks through the glass with utter terror, saying, "Is that Godzilla?" Which potentially tells us this isn't the first time Godzilla has risen from the sea and wreaked complete havoc on Tokyo. Or potentially the radios are warning the listeners of the attack by the King of the Monsters, telling them to evacuate, but it might be too late for this character. We then get an extended look at Godzilla when he bites into the train carriage, which most likely follows the scene from earlier when Godzilla throws the bus onto the train tracks. We also get a really epic shot of Godzilla using his tail as a weapon, slicing through all the buildings, crushing everything in its path, even the evacuating civilians. I think it's safe to say that Godzilla shows no remorse in this particular film. However, in spite of Godzilla's fury in this scene, at the front of the crowd, we see our lead character. And honestly, the CG looks really good, and yeah, I can be a little harsh on that stuff sometimes in particular because obviously I'm a stop motion guy, so yeah. Now, honestly, don't take that the wrong way. I do like CG, and it does take quite a bit of talent. But obviously, stop motion is what I admire the most because, well, let's be honest here. Our stuff is real. And if you take the, well, consideration as to how much time goes into stop motion or claymation in particular, well, I think it's safe to say which animator is generally suffering probably a lot more for their art form. Caffeine is my new best friend. At any rate, I'm being a little sidetracked here. Let's get back to the topic of, well, CGI animated Godzillas. Either way, -1 Godzilla is definitely a big step up from Shin Godzilla, which already had pretty great VFX, considering the budget. And honestly, I really like that movie too. It was pretty good, again, because it was probably a little bit closer to the original origins of Godzilla, be it his design was, well, dramatically different to say the very least, but I definitely would enjoy making one at some point. But I haven't gotten any requests for that one yet. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. But I also love how in -1 Godzilla, Godzilla appears to be a little smaller than, well, some of his other counterparts, but still big enough to cause some serious damage. It just makes, well, the attacks all the more personal at that point. Because some of these other larger Godzillas, well, in my honest opinion, are so large that you could basically simply get out of the way and not have to worry about it too much. Versus this guy, he might be looking right at you. With one scene in particular, with a well-placed foot stomp, we can see people ragdolling, which is honestly pretty scary, but yet kind of funny at the same time. Yeet. Basically because he is powerful enough to do that indirectly. We then get a look at some people hanging on to dear life on the top of a building as it comes crashing down. And honestly, this is a very compelling scene because you can tell they're trying to hold on to that edge with everything they've got. We see our characters running away, but I'm not sure how long they will survive. Because right behind them, quickly approaching, is Godzilla, crushing everything in his path. It almost seems like this Godzilla particularly enjoys tormenting the humans. We then cut to a bright flash of something exploding, reminiscent that of an atomic bomb blast, which is haunting to see itself, especially in a Godzilla film, where Godzilla is usually the physical embodiment of the destruction. We then get a glimpse of Godzilla towering over the ruins. And honestly, this shot looks really epic, gorgeous, but terrifying. People have stopped running, couples embrace each other, and they know there's no point struggling anymore. They're already dead. The blast completely levels all the buildings, flattening the city. I am curious as to what actually caused this explosion, though. This may be the result of Godzilla's atomic breath, but what is more likely is the Americans dropping another bomb. Probably making an attempt to kill him, but this is probably just gonna piss him off. And I think it's pretty obvious, but this film probably won't be shying away from, well, the heavy topics, pun intended. Because we then get to see the complete devastation of the result of the explosion. Scenes that were all too familiar in World War II. Up next, another shot of a battleship slicing through the water. And underneath, you can make the faint glimpse of Godzilla beneath the waves in his natural habitat. This definitely has some 2014 MonsterVerse vibes. Takashi has said he's a big fan of the MonsterVerse, and it's very cool to see him utilize some of that inspiration for some of the visuals. We then see more of the cast standing out by the ocean, potentially watching some naval warfare between Godzilla and the Americans. We then get a glimpse of some bodies which I'm guessing came from the shipwreck, considering we see other large metal equipment that seems like it's been washed upon shore. A character then says, "Why were we called out here?" as we see a wide shot of a steamboat out in the middle of the ocean, as our character peers out, possibly preparing for an encounter with the king of the monsters. We then see a United States government reel, which appears to be a presentation of what they know about Godzilla and how they believe they can stop him. This possibly includes a briefing on how to use atomic weapons, believing he can be stopped with conventional bombing. We see another character played by Hidetaki Yoshioka, as he says the government isn't telling the public, probably about the giant monsters that exist. Then it shows a map of the Japanese island from the teaser, as they signal Godzilla's approach. Our character then says someone's gotta do it, which shows that Japan will be taking matters into their own hands despite the American occupation. We then see two ships meeting, which looks like they're about to collide. And we see two of our main leads shouting at the other ship, so they may be relaying information or transferring cargo. We then see our lead again, this time covered in black dirt. With pieces of clothing laying all around him, he may be the only survivor of this devastating explosion that flattened Tokyo, and he screams in emotional pain. We then cut to another great shot of a battleship when Godzilla reaches out and grabs it. And honestly, I'm pumped to see this movie because wow, that was a good hook. In the next shot, it's best to almost play a slowed down version because if you look closely, it isn't an ordinary extraordinary explosion. We see some sort of blue shockwave absolutely obliterate the battleship. This could be Godzilla's atomic breath blasting through the water like what we saw in Godzilla vs. Kong, or something completely new. And the light of the blast reflecting off the water is actually very pretty and, well, kind of cool. Either way, this battleship is being evaporated. Up next, we get a newly confirmed cast member, Guranosuke Sasaki, as he looks on in horror and states everyone is dead. Following this, we see the aftermath of the destroyed ship, which is washed upon shore with a huge hole in the middle of it, where the explosion made impact, as another smaller ship comes up to investigate. This situation tells me that this probably happens earlier in the film and no one knows what Godzilla is yet. We might even get a scene like in 1998 where the only survivor can say, Gojira, which makes sense when a character later on in the film knows his name. We then witness an argument between two characters played by Sakura Ando and a Japanese soldier, as he likely hid from the carnage to save himself, deserting his team. She calls him a disgrace, understandably upset considering she's probably lost everyone she knows. And the set design for this scene matches perfectly. Very much apocalyptic. This is crazy that we're getting this level of destruction in a modern-day Godzilla film. It looks great. I'm definitely excited. Then we see something you don't see every day, a flying ship clearly thrown by Godzilla into the bay. As he rises out of the ocean, we then see our lead character looking up at something buried under some rubble as he states, "That monster will never forgive us." It's interesting how they talk about forgiveness, because we all know the US atomic bombing, well, that was terrible, monstrous even. But it was in response to the atrocities committed by the Japanese during the war. This film might not only criticize the American government, but themselves as well, which will be a super interesting dynamic, especially for a Godzilla film. We then get the tagline, "Survive and fight," as Godzilla rises out of the ocean, ready to kill. One thing you might notice is that the bay has already been destroyed. This may mean this isn't the first time he has come ashore, or he has already used his atomic breath to obliterate the coastline. Similar to what he did in The Return of Godzilla, we then get the title card, Godzilla -1. Post-war Japan lost everything, but Godzilla arrived and then set everything from 0 to minus. And finally, we get a crispy shot of a scorched Godzilla, shrouded in black smoke, and he looks pissed. But what could have caused this? Perhaps this is the last scream of pain as he dies from a new form of oxygen destroyer. Or perhaps this is following an attack from a second monster that the trailer hasn't given away yet. We'll have to wait and find out. The last reveal from this trailer is that it will be playing in IMAX and 4DX. This is huge news. This isn't going to be some limited release. This is going to be a big event. So everyone, be sure to get your tickets at the biggest screen possible, because that only seems appropriate for a kaiju-sized movie. The film comes out December 1st, which is not too far away, I do say. And I ain't gonna lie, that trailer has definitely set expectations fairly high. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. It looks action-packed, intense, thought-provoking, disturbing, frightening, provocative, and visually incredible. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what Yakizami brings to the table. From what I can understand, it's been a long time coming, since his Always Sunset 2 opening. It's also been confirmed that Naoki Sato will be the composer for the film, and has worked with Yamazaki on some of his older films. So consider him to be part of the director's dream team. And I look forward to hearing his score, because what we hear so far is haunting. Godzilla -1 can't come out soon enough, so what did you think of the trailer? Did it raise expectations for you? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to stomp on that like button, and perhaps subscribe if you're new, and have your post notifications turned on so you don't miss any of the new Godzilla updates. Or perhaps share with your friends so we can grow this little claymation Godzilla community. However, that does conclude all of our Godzilla -1 fun, at least for part 1, because in part 2, I'll be going into further detail for all of you, because I'll be sculpting away with plasticine clay, covering up this skeleton, you could say, whilst talking about Godzilla -1 because this film looks ever so much fun, and it seems like a lot of you cannot get enough of these kaiju, so I'm here for you. To sculpt a way to have a world full of claymation monsters one day, which will be wreaking havoc, pun intended, on my little Lego city, you could say, with atomic farts someday. Now, the big question for the day is which Godzilla will be the king of the farts, I do say. Will it be Godzilla -1 or the original one? Good lord, what has my life become? Because now it seems to be all about things coming out of Godzilla's bum. Although I must say it is a lot of fun, but I do spend several hours looking up Godzilla's rear. Oh dear. And I ain't gonna lie, there was one thing that I always did fear, and it was becoming somewhat like the SpongeBob guy. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with who that is exactly, but there's a guy on YouTube that commonly does, well, SpongeBob theories, and apparently he started doing short horror films and didn't take off and did a SpongeBob theory, and it took off, and now he's known as a SpongeBob guy. Well, I'm now known as the goddamn Godzilla fart guy. And I can't seem to shake that image, so, yep, we're here, and yeah, I don't know what else to say at this point. Anyway, build rundown! On this kaiju-sized project today, we built a -1 Godzilla stop-motion skeleton, you could say, and the materials used for this project today: aluminum armature wire to make the base frame, oven-baked clay to make the bones, I do say, as well as all those, well, crazy backplates, one could say. Which took me over 16 hours, I might say. Which is why I'm behind schedule today, but that's okay because it's all for a -1 Godzilla, you might say. I should probably also say we use some steel wire for the joints today, as well as some tin foil to keep the weight down because we don't want our Godzilla to fall down. We also use some sticky tack, you could say, on the bottom of his feet, I say, to keep him upright today. And some plasticine clay to keep the joints from flopping around, I do say. But that's all the materials used today, so let's go over some of the tools used to make the skeleton, I do say. We used rakes to scrape the clay away, and sculpting knives to get the shapes, I say. And some rubber sculpting tools, because without those I would probably be a fool. And a ball stylist, you could say, to make those eye sockets today. Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Godzilla -1 project, where today, one could say, we're turning this project into more than just a skeleton today. So during this YouTube video today, we'll be working on the Godzilla -1 project, I do say. But before we get too carried away with the plasticine clay, there's a few finishing details we need to do on this skeleton, you might say. Which is step 1, which has already begun, which is the painting fun. And then once that's done, there's a few other small parts to make, which will assist him in making some earthquakes. Because Godzilla is known for making the earth shake beneath his massive weight. So once those details are out of the way, we'll be adding massive amounts of plasticine clay. Now, one could say I'm pretty sure this Godzilla weighs at least a few pounds now today. But as I sculpt away, we'll be learning some fun facts about Godzilla -1 today. Godzilla -1 released its official trailer not too long ago, and the question on everyone's minds is, well, why is it called Godzilla -1? It is a widely held belief that the colossal behemoth known as Godzilla, emerging from the depths of the sea in Hiroshi Honda's seminal 1954 cinematic masterpiece, serves a profound embodiment of Japan's post-war trauma. An intricate allegory echoing the haunting reverberations of nuclear specters that have descended upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Or perhaps a symbolic representation of a vengeful and destructive USA. Since those fateful days, the reptilian entity has assumed a myriad of forms, some displaying benevolence while others showing malevolence. However, the inextricable ties binding Godzilla to Japan's darkest epoch has seldom been as palpable as they are in Godzilla -1. The forthcoming cinematic opus from Toho, posed to grace US theaters on the first day of December. The most recent trailer for the cinematic tour de force lays bare this poignant connection. Godzilla -1 unfolds in the backdrop of the late 1940s, portrays the creature's rampage within a nation already humbled by the howling specters of World War II defeat. Toho, in a press release explicating the film's title, conveys this stark message. After the war, Japan's economic state has been reduced to zero. Godzilla appears and plunges the country into a negative state. As if this wasn't laden enough with post-war melancholy, the trailer masterfully juxtaposes scenes of Godzilla inflicting destruction, with haunting imagery of nuclear detonations, lifeless soldiers strewn across battlefields, and a woman's anguished cry directed at a uniformed man, screaming, "You're a disgrace." One character's somber declaration adds depth to the narrative, stating, "That monster will never forgive us." If Shin Godzilla sought to satirize Japanese politics while reshaping Godzilla, in the contents of the 2011 tsunami and the Fukushima nuclear catastrophe, then Godzilla -1 is unmistakably returning the iconic titan to its original meaning. Yet, both these cinematic endeavors share a common aspiration: to rekindle the primal terror that has always defined this colossal creature. So what does the -1 mean in Godzilla -1? The monster will never forgive us line is a perfect example of a potential double meaning. However, if we take Toho's press release statement, as Godzilla emerges, casting the nation into an abyss of negativity, as the sole explanation, that would be nearly it. And yet, we have rumors and rumblings that there are indeed two Godzillas in fact in this film. One is rumored and rumored to be a orca-shaped titan monster, and there are other rumors and rumblings and leaks that state there was a Godzilla that hasn't gone through the mutation of nuclear testing, and thus wasn't as armored and destroyed. So Godzilla -1 could literally mean Godzilla minus another Godzilla. Now, I know that sounds simplistic and almost laughable in that context, but when viewed through the lens of Godzilla having a mate, a family member, or potentially the only other of its kind, lost, murdered, destroyed, in potentially nuclear warfare, which adds another layer of meaning and sadness to the name Godzilla -1. Godzilla -1 is the magnum opus written and directed by visionary Takashi Yamazaki. It marks Toho's 33rd foray into the realm of Godzilla, and represents the studio's triumphant return into live action, after the renowned success of Shin Godzilla. An intricately woven deal with legendary pictures the studio behind American MonsterVerse Godzilla films precludes Toho from releasing a live-action masterpiece the same year as Legendary. Given this constraint, the silver lining for aficionados is that Toho is thus motivated to grace the USA with the presence of -1 this year, prior to Legendary releasing Godzilla vs. X Kong: The New Empire next year, 2024. And I do believe Toho were very smart with their deal with Legendary. Have Legendary nurture and foster a wide narrative and appeal for the Godzilla franchise. When Toho comes in and releases his version of Godzilla, the true version of Godzilla, one could say. One should say because it's not far from the original version at all. Looking at the trailer, which I did a review on last week, during part 1 of this project, so if you haven't seen that, be sure to go check it out. Link is available in the post description. Anyway, apart from my shameless plug, the trailer was definitely beautifully haunting, with incredible imagery and true physics, where Godzilla stomps and storms around where there's very real weight. And one thing as a side note that I find absolutely astounding, Takashi Yamazaki is a VFX artist, writer, and director for this film. The VFX of Godzilla -1, at least per trailer, are, well, truly incredible. Definitely a thing of beauty and horror, one could say. So that concludes our section on this video as to why it is called Godzilla -1. Unfortunately, we're not exactly left with a definitive answer, so to speak, yet. We'll have to wait and see the film at this particular point, but let me know what you think it is in the comments below. Did you know there were rumors and rumblings of another creature? Does it add another layer of sadness and melancholy to the film? It also might answer some questions as to why Godzilla is on such a rampage during that trailer. But it's hard to say what exactly is going through that monster's mind in that trailer, one could say. Either way, I'm definitely excited to see it, you could say. Now, in my honest opinion, I'm pretty sure it's probably going to basically be a modernized version of the 1954 Godzilla film. which I'm basing more off, well, the press release, because it's generally probably a more reliable source than, say, a social media post from one that might be slightly questionable for the other theory. Now, I'm definitely not against it, because, well, let's be honest here, a Godzilla fight of that magnitude would definitely be very, very cool to see, and, well, I don't think I would have any complaints about having, that in the film. And personally, it could give it a, well, interesting narrative that we may have never actually seen in a Godzilla film. Now, I must admit to my regular viewers here, I'm kind of maybe a little rusty on some of these Godzilla films. I honestly haven't seen too many for a very, very long time. So here's your kind of opportunity to educate me on Godzilla. If you have any interesting facts, please let me know in the comments below, or have any suggestions on movies I should be watching for Godzillas, in particular for inspiration. Yeah, there's a lot from what I've learned, and I have been picking away at a few, but it would be nice to have some, well, direct, suggestions from my audience who are very avid about this monster, apparently. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be about Godzilla. It could be about any of the following monsters, well, from that franchise. Because, well, I'll be honest, Godzilla is probably the only one I really know anything about, unfortunately. And I didn't really want to do 2 Godzillas in a row for a monster project, but unfortunately, I was working late one night on my YouTube channel, and, well, within 2 hours of its release, I saw the Godzilla -1 trailer, so I was like, okay, algorithm, I am listening. I should probably also admit that, yeah, upon viewing Godzilla -1, even though he hasn't actually been in an official movie yet, I was like, wow, I love this design, so he's probably easily one of my favorite Godzilla designs out there. Apart from the 1954, which I do love, don't get me wrong, mainly because it's the original, but there are some scenes in that particular movie or suit that it looks just a little bit janky or a little bit derpy, to put it politely. Especially the puppet. The puppet did not do it justice. But yeah, he's definitely probably my favorite Godzilla, just because he is technically the original. Although I do honestly quite like the 2019 MonsterVerse one as well. That one is definitely very cool, although I understand that some of my, well, regular followers here aren't a huge fan of that guy in particular, but I personally think the design is still pretty cool, ill regards of it being obviously a little bit, well, drawn away from, say, the original, but it still looks cool in my opinion, so whatever. And I would have to say at least number 4 and number 3 gotta go to Shin, because wow, he was pretty cool and a very different take on Godzilla, and I must, well, admit that I really appreciated that film as well, because it kind of went back to its original roots, and I think it did very well on that fact alone, and not to mention, just the overall design of Godzilla was kind of creepy and almost off-putting, but I loved it. And I gotta give a shout out to the Heisei Godzilla as well, because that's kind of, well, the last mark of the Suitmation era, and honestly, the design for that one looks very cool, and is kind of what, personally, the, a take on the original Godzilla mixed with a bit of modern, looks should look like, in my opinion. And I would definitely like to make that one someday, because it's apparently rumored to be one of the strongest Godzillas out of them all. Anyway, that's kind of my list of favorite Godzillas. Let me know what your favorite Godzilla is in the comments below. And one more thing I should probably brief over before we get into the build rundown of this video. I won't be doing test animations with this Godzilla immediately after completion like the last one. I'm sorry if that disappoints any of you. I will be doing animations with him shortly after though. Basically, Halloween's coming and I have another animation project idea I would like to work on. I was going through my analytics recently, and one thing I noticed, and I probably should mention briefly, is about 1.8% of you are, well, actually watching that are subscribed, so be sure you have your post notifications turned on if you haven't, because YouTube is apparently not really putting this stuff out, unfortunately. So, I digress. I noticed my Argentinosaurus zombie dinosaur has, well, recently gone up in views quite a lot, so I will probably be doing some test animations or bringing that guy to life for, well, Halloween's sake, because, well, what more appropriate time to bring a zombie dinosaur to life than, well, October, right? Because, honestly, I've wanted to bring that thing to life for quite some time now, because I've wanted to see a 3D rendition of, well, that dinosaur, because I think it would be very cool. Anyway, it's time for the build rundown. First thing I would like to say on the build rundown today, for those of you who like to say there is a lack of clay, well, this Godzilla is really putting my lazy Susan to the test today, because it is bending under his weight, you could say. So I think my build rundown section's gonna need to upgrade soon, you could say. But that's okay, it makes my Godzilla more accurate, you could say. But the things accomplished today on this project, you might say. Nearly all the painting and sculpting is done now, I do say. Some of you may say this Godzilla is nearly finished today, but to that I say there's still a lot of detail work to do to bring this Godzilla to life for all of you. So once all the detail is done, that's when this Godzilla shall be done. Hello everyone, so during this YouTube video today, I'm happy to say we'll be finishing off my Godzilla -1 project today. The first order business today will be finishing off these spikes, I do say. Then once all those pointy details are done, we'll be on to the third layer of clay, you could say. Where Godzilla -1 will be getting thick, I do say. I think it's easy to say this -1 is about 3 pounds of plasticine fun. He is definitely a big one, this -1. But once the third layer of clay is out of the way, one could say we'll be on to the small details, I do say. But once all the nitpicky stuff is done on our -1, we'll be taking him to our Lego town for some future foreshadowing fun. But as I sculpt away on this -1 today, we'll be learning some fun facts about this upcoming movie today, you could say. So before I get too carried away with the poetry today, let's learn more about -1 the movie, I do say. Godzilla has fought against countless monsters throughout the years. Creatures of unimaginable strength. Alien monstrosities, mutants, and robotic menaces. But one thing he has never had to conquer is himself. He has of course fought against a freak of nature clone, aka Space Godzilla, and an alien robot disguised as him, as well as Zilla, or 1998 Godzilla. But he has never had to duke it out with another official king of the monsters in a bid for supremacy. But what if Godzilla -1 not only had one Godzilla, but two? And they will battle it out to become the last monster standing. There is evidence to suggest that may be the case. So let's go over why two Godzillas might fight in Godzilla -1. -1 looks to revisit the post-war era for the first time in decades, going back to a time where the tragedy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was still raw in the population of Japan. Godzilla is the physical embodiment of that level of destruction or that disaster. Going back to that era will help bridge the connection to make the most horrifying representation of the horrors of nuclear war since Godzilla's very inception. And the trailer reflects that, giving us images that haunt back to a darker time. But will the film be a by-the-numbers remake of Godzilla 1954, or will it be something else? Like in Shin Godzilla, I'm inclined to believe there will be a twist on the formula. And a 4chan leak suggests this may be the case. Now take this leak with a grain of salt. I'm not confirming this is happening for sure, but there is evidence that leans in favor of this direction. And yeah, spoiler warning, just in case these leaks end up being legit. According to the leak, G-Man won't be alone in this film and will be joined by another one of his species that was unaffected by the nuclear radiation, being very similar but also distinct in many ways. With the Godzilla we see in the trailer having rough mutated skin and warped bony dorsal plates, whereas the natural specimen has smooth whale-like skin and cranial proportions very similar to a orca, as well as some large fin-like dorsal plates emphasizing the oceanic qualities of this monster even further, which has a silhouette that's pretty much exactly like the -1 poster. Although this still could be a stylized G, and personally it does rather kind of look like that, but at the same time too, there's a lot of Japanese writing on the side, so it's hard to, well, perhaps, just justify this as a stylized G. It could be a lot more than that. The film will reportedly be a tragedy as the two monsters battle and go head to head, each one fulfilling a different role within the story. With the mutated Godzilla wanting to destroy Japan because of the hideous mutations it's received due to the bombs dropped within the city, whilst the other Godzilla tries to bring him home to their natural habitat. Serizawa, who has a central role in the film, will build a oxygen destroyer much like what we saw in the 1954 movie. But when it's activated to kill the mutated Godzilla, the twin will instead take the hit for its brother, sacrificing itself so Godzilla may live another day, leaving the king of the monsters to live and potentially star in a new film franchise. Now, in my honest opinion, this sounds really cool, and I would really love to see that, because it sounds like it would be a very unique take on the Godzilla series. It sounds action-packed and, well, a tragedy all rolled into one. There is actually 2 points in the trailer that may support this plot leak. When one of the leads states, "He will never forgive us." This could be in reference to the murder of Godzilla's twin, and how Godzilla will never forget what they did to his species. Just like how Japan will never forget what happened in 1945. And with the final shot of a torched Godzilla roaring with anger at the sky, could be immediately following the death of its friend. And the civilians look on in horror as the one that caused so much misery still lives to torment them. Now, there may be some legitimacy to this leak. The film is, of course, going back to when it all started, and will be expanding upon the original concept, which means certain themes and iconography will be, of course, returning. Now, in the 1954 original, it was proposed that Gojira was in fact one of many that lived in the bottom of the ocean, thriving for millions of years, feeding on deep-sea organisms. But their habitat was destroyed by American hydrogen bomb tests. Dr. Yamane proposed Gojira was living amongst others of his kind prior to the destruction, leaving Godzilla as the last one standing, drawing him out of his natural habitat and seeking revenge. This idea is supported by official artwork from the 1954 Godzilla living with other Godzillas under the water, before a huge explosion destroys their habitat, killing all of Godzilla's companions, burning him in the process, enraging him, and drawing him to the surface. So if -1 is bringing back concepts from the original and expanding upon it, we may see the idea of multiple Godzillas explored, and instead of them all dying from the explosion, they might fight against Godzilla -1 as a representation of all that is good and all that is bad of nuclear energy, and the cost that it brings. Basically, both Godzillas will be the physical embodiment of both the light and the dark. A war on both perspectives of the use of the nuclear bomb, and how, from the American point of view, it ended the war and saved lives, whilst from the Japanese perspective, it was an unnecessary use of force and took hundreds of thousands of lives in the most painful way possible. It could make -1 an excellent exploration of atomic power, something we have never really seen before from the Godzilla series. -1 could be the most impactful Godzilla film ever made. Now, always remember to take a leak with a grain of salt, but I personally would love to see this happen. But what do you think? Do you want to see 2 Godzillas in Godzilla -1? And do you like the idea of a natural Godzilla looking more like a orca or a whale-like creature? Let me know in the comments below. I personally think it's a really cool idea they could potentially have a natural Godzilla in this film, mainly because it would be expanding upon the actual original lore, which is kind of a, well, concept that's been seen before in certain other films, perhaps not really Godzilla related, but I could see it actually working out fairly well. One example that I can think of this, and a movie that I personally quite enjoyed, was called The Dark Crystal. Essentially, Netflix did a dubbed version of the original, which was essentially expanding upon the original idea, but unfortunately, back in the day, they were unable to actually expand upon that concept because it would have been essentially too difficult to actually film. So, Netflix stepped in several years later. Now, for some of my younger viewers, that movie might be a little terrifying in particular. Some of the monsters in that are not pretty, but very cool, and I would honestly kind of like to make one someday. But, at any rate, we're getting a little sidetracked from the original concept here. That kind of concludes, obviously, the fun facts for Godzilla -1 that will be coming up in theaters December 1st for, well, us Canadians like me, as well as the Americans. Now, I do believe that the Japanese are getting a slightly earlier release date than us, but personally, that only seems kind of fair. After all, Godzilla is kind of their baby. Ill regards, I'm very excited to see this film, and I hope you guys are excited as me. Now, one thing I should probably briefly mention here too, I do apologize to my regular viewers that I am slightly behind schedule here. I usually try to post once a week, but unfortunately life just kind of got in the way this time and I was unable to do that, and well, this Godzilla did take a little bit longer than expected, but I wanted to make sure that it was, well, done appropriately, and honestly, I think it turned out to be one of my best projects yet. Now, part of the reason for, well, the delay is because winter is soon coming here in Canada, unfortunately, so I'll be losing my cool thumbnails, unfortunately, at this point. But I should be building some dioramas for my dinosaurs, as well as various other projects very soon here. So that way, I still have some pretty cool pictures to take for thumbnails, and, well, use the sets, obviously, for film projects themselves. And if you obviously really enjoy this content and would like to see more and get updates in between projects, well, obviously I do shorts every day here anyway, so you're going to get the same information. But if you really like it, be sure to go check out the links in the post description where there's, well, links to my Facebook as well as Instagram handle. Now, unfortunately, there is a little bit of bad news here. Unfortunately, recently, I kind of threw my back at work pretty bad. For lack of a better term, I twisted it, and unfortunately, my back is not the greatest, unfortunately. I've got some pretty bad prior history with injuries in the past, so that was part of the delay, unfortunately. I don't really want to expand upon it too much. I'm not honestly here for a pity party by any means. I rather people admire my work, obviously, and yeah. Just, unfortunately, I lost an entire day to that, and I probably will be going to the doctor shortly and kind of getting things checked out just to make sure that everything is okay, because, yeah, mobility has been a slight issue, and Friday was completely bedridden, so I won't digress any further. This is an art channel, not an injury channel, but yeah, that's part of the delay, and I do apologize. Just hope everyone knows that I am only human, and I'm the only person essentially in production of this channel. So if I'm down, unfortunately, nothing basically gets done. Now that we've served, well, the bad news, it's time for some good news to end this video off with. Now, I was recently actually interviewed for a podcast, so I'd like to give a shout out to PT Russell. She recently started a podcast and has been following me for at least a couple years now, so she remembers this channel back when it was all about cars, believe it or not. Boy, we ventured far from that. So if you would like to learn more about, well, this stop-motion world, be sure to go check out her podcast. Now, obviously, we talk about various projects and the, well, process of stop-motion itself, so it gives you an idea how long this stuff actually does take. And, well, just to give you an extra little bit of a hook, the name Moose Motion actually does have a meaning, and the name is, well, basically described there. Again, thank you, PT. It was definitely an honor to be your first guest, and for those of you who want to check out the podcast, it's available on Spotify, and her handle there is Journaling with PT. I'll also provide a link in the post description. I should probably also mention my microphone unfortunately broke during the production of this video, so I also had to replace that, so that was another unexpected delay, so hopefully the audio is slightly better in this video in comparison to some of my other ones. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I honestly think this is some of my best work yet, and if you do agree, be sure to smash that like button as hard as a kaiju. Or perhaps leave a nice comment below. Honestly, that's probably one of the best things I get from this channel is the nice positive words of admiration that I get from, well, these projects and various other things that I do. It honestly means the world to me, and it means a lot that so many people find my artwork this endearing and, well, have been inspired by it. So thank you very much. You have no idea how much this means to me. So I hope this continues to grow and we continue this little, well, stop motion adventure. So if you're new to this channel, be sure to stomp on that subscribe button and have your post notifications turned on so you don't miss any of the new updates. I post daily shorts and usually weekly videos. At any rate, I will leave you guys to the glamour shots. I hope you enjoy them. Hey, thank you for sticking around to the very end of the video. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the content, comment below what you think, share with your friends, and perhaps consider subscribing if you're new. Anyway, that's enough from me. Till next time, take it easy.